What's happening, everybody? Close to the weekend. Hope everybody's had a good week so far. Welcome to another episode of Facemask Fantasy. Should be a fun one today. We're going over RB2 rankings for the 2023 season. Just last week went over the RB1 rankings, the QB1 and the RB1 rankings. Those are on the channel if you want to go back and check those out. And on Tuesday, we did the QB2 rankings for the Superflex group. Today, one that I think we can all get excited about, get on board with, is the RB2 rankings, because that pertains to everybody, no matter what your format is. So should be a good one. This is definitely where the conversation deviates a little bit. Everybody's going to have personal preference here, of course. The consensus will probably be somewhat in lockstep, but I'm sure I have guys in my rankings that you guys don't, and I'm sure I've left guys out that you may disagree with. That's okay. That's part of the discourse. That's part of the conversation and figuring out what makes the most sense from a team building perspective and just guys to target, guys to potentially fade for reasons X, Y, and Z. That's why we do this. So happy to bring it to y'all. Next week, we'll do the wide receiver rankings. We'll hit the wide receiver ones and the wide receiver twos for the 2023 season. So be sure to tune in for that. Speaking of the wide receivers, there's not much news as far as the wide receiver landscape these days. We're pretty much just waiting to see where DeAndre Hopkins signs. There was a report earlier today that the Bills aren't necessarily pursuing him. That makes a lot of sense. The fit makes sense, but also it makes sense that the Bills aren't going to be able to add him. They're up against it from a cap perspective. And so is the other most desirable destination, the Kansas City Chiefs. So we're probably looking at a situation where DeAndre Hopkins chooses between the two teams that have actually expressed interest that we know of, between the Tennessee Titans and the New England Patriots. One of those other teams, either the Bills or the Chiefs, is going to have to figure out a way to shuffle some money around, whether it's restructuring current contracts to kick the can down the road in order to create some room for DeAndre Hopkins. Whether they actually want to do that or not is another story. Whether they're capable of it or not is something that is yet to be seen. So as of today, it feels like DeAndre Hopkins isn't going to land in one of the more favorable spots from a fantasy perspective, unfortunately. But if he does end up in New England or Tennessee, the one saving grace there that we can get excited about is there's no doubt he'd be the clear-cut top option in those passing games. So while the landing spots they don't look ideal on paper, he would become the bona fide top option in the passing game, either with the Patriots or with the Titans. You can't necessarily say that for the Bills or the Chiefs. So that's just kind of the wait and see on the wide receiver landscape. Is just where does DeAndre Hopkins go and what situation does he shake up? If it's Tennessee, Treylon Burks takes a bit of a dip. If it's the Patriots, all of those guys are already pretty cheap. Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton, Devontae Parker, and then, Mike Gesicki, Hunter Henry. None of those guys have an ADP higher than 100 in one quarterback leagues. So that probably doesn't change a whole lot. The guy who maybe between the two teams, between the options on those two teams, the guy who has the most to lose, I guess, is Treylon Burks. But even then, you're talking about a situation where now Burks gets to be the number two option, gets to play second fiddle to a bona fide stud, and therefore the pressure's off of him. So in a way, that could help him. I like Burks no matter what. I like taking Burks anyway. If Hopkins signs with the Titans and Burks' ADP dips a little bit, I'll be even more in on him. People might be a little bit more scared off because then they look at DeAndre Hopkins at the top of the depth chart and think that Burks may not be worth his current cost. I say, fine, let that happen. Let that play out. We'll talk about the wide receivers next week. We'll get through the wide receiver ones on Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern. We'll do the wide receiver twos on Thursday, also 6 p.m. Eastern. So be sure to check that out if you guys are available. What's going on, Crumbly Heads? What's going on, Alex? Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for coming in and hanging out with us on this Thursday, right before another summer weekend. Hopefully, everybody's got some fun plans, whatever that is, however you choose to spend your time. Hopefully, it's a good one. But we're only one more work day until the weekend. So let's talk fantasy to help us get there. Again, running back rankings were covered. Running back one rankings were covered last week. If you guys missed that, Christian McCaffrey I have as my RB1. Bijan Robinson as my RB2. Austin Eckler is my RB3. Jonathan Taylor is my RB4. Nick Chubb is my RB5. Saquon Barkley is my RB6, although there's definite concern with him right now about his availability for week 1. He has until, I believe, 4 p.m. on Monday, the 17th, to sign his franchise tag. It doesn't sound like he's interested in doing that. By all accounts, it doesn't look like the Giants are interested in budging off of that. I'm sure both sides are interested in coming to a long-term agreement to keep Saquon in New York. But if they were close as far as what both sides wanted from a dollars perspective, then that would already be taken care of, and it's not yet. So while I do have Saquon listed as my RB6, there's definitely some concern about will Saquon actually be available week 1. Usually these things ultimately get resolved, and you would especially think that's the case with Saquon and what his level of importance is to the Giants offense. But they're still at a stalemate, so the Giants might feel otherwise. In a vacuum, Saquon is my RB6 and a great value in the back half, mid to back half of the second round of 1 QB leagues, but it's officially getting a little dicey as far as his availability for week 1. Tony Pollard is my RB7. I put Ramondre Stevenson as my RB8. That would probably change a little bit. Maybe it bumps him down a spot or two if DeAndre Hopkins ultimately signs in New England. Some of those targets. Ramondre soaked up a ton of targets last year, and while there's not a direct correlation to wide receiver and running back targets, you would think in an offense like that might ding Ramondre Stevenson a little bit if Hopkins ends up in New England. But for now, he's my RB8. Derrick Henry is my RB9. Josh Jacobs is my RB10. Najee Harris is my RB11. And Breece Hall is my RB12. So some somewhat extensive look at that in last week's stream, if you care to check that out. The RB2 rankings for the 2023 season, just to go ahead and kick this thing right off. The first of my RB2s and the RB13 for the 2023 season, we've seen his ADP dip a little bit since the NFL draft. I have Kenneth Walker here. Walker was originally being projected as a third-round pick prior to the NFL draft. Of course, the Seahawks added Zach Charbonnet on day 2 of the NFL draft, officially kind of muddying those waters and leaving it up to speculation as to what that breakdown is going to be. We know that the Seahawks under Pete Carroll traditionally are a run-first offense. They want to run the ball a lot, and they have utilized multiple running backs in the past. Dating back to when Chris Carson was there, when Rashad Penny was there, when he was healthy and on the field. The team utilized multiple players. They utilized multiple backs. And so from a bird's eye view, when you look at it, it wasn't totally surprising that they added Zach Charbonnet, but at the same time, we did think that they had found maybe a guy who had a little bit more of workhorse bell cow potential in Kenneth Walker. That might not now be the case with Charbonnet in the mix. Nevertheless, Walker flashed his talent last year, got over 200 carries. He would have had more if he played closer to the entirety of the season. 228 carries, cracked 1,000 yards, about 4.5 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns scored. Only caught 27 passes, but I mean, that's not bad for a guy who isn't really labeled as a pass catching running back. Um, you would think, again, with increased opportunities from just playing more games, he did suffer a few injuries last year and missed a little bit of time. But you would think that reception total can go up maybe a little bit, maybe not a significant amount, though, because in addition to adding Zach Charbonnet, they also added another high end pass catching option in Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first round. So maybe the catches don't go up, but Walker should be in line for, I would think he's still in line for 250 opportunities, combined carries and targets. Um, and when you factor in what we expect there from a workload perspective, coupled with his ADP, because now his ADP has tumbled to the 5th round, that's a gamble I want to take as many times as I possibly can. Walker's ADP was around, like, it was in the 25 to 30 range prior to the NFL draft. It's now, I believe it's around 50 in one quarterback leagues, half PPR, of course. 52. His ADP is a 52 on Underdog Fantasy. That is incredibly affordable for a guy who has, despite the potential committee with Zach Charbonnet, Walker has RB1 upside. Played in 15 games last year. He got minimal work in a few of those games. He got hurt. He got hurt in the December game against the Rams. He started out incredibly slow. They eased him in a little bit to start the season. It wasn't until like week 5 or 6, which was when Rashad Penny went down with I think he broke his leg, that he really started to get additional work. But for the first 4 weeks, he was kind of worked in slowly. He didn't have a ton of opportunities right away. That's not going to be the case in his sophomore season. He's going to be the 1A in this backfield from day one. He was on the injury report a lot last year, so there is a little bit of concern there. But, I mean, you could take that same sentence and apply it to most of the running backs in the NFL. Pretty much everybody's got an injury concern, because not because of their history, but because of the sport that they play. I feel like I say this frequently enough. The injury concerns can simply apply to 100% of NFL players. So while some appeared like to be more of a red flag than others, Walker could technically fit that bill. He was on the injury report a decent amount last year. Even when he did play, he spent a lot of weeks slapped with a questionable tag. Nevertheless, the talent was flashed. Went over 100 yards 5 times last year. He just missed that a 6th time. I think he went for 97 yards one game against the Cardinals. And again, the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, he was eased in slowly. He wasn't the main guy while Rashad Penny was still healthy. So that's not going to be the case this year. Zach Charbonnet probably is more of the 1B. Walker is the 1A. And in a run-first offense, when you can get the 1A in the 5th round, I'm doing that. I'm making that happen. Kenneth Walker in the 5th round is a great value, despite Zach Charbonnet's addition to that team. He is my RB13, the first RB2, just misses the RB1 rankings, still can absolutely crack the top 12 when it's all said and done. I love grabbing Kenneth Walker in the 5th round, especially if you start with a strong wide receiver plan of attack for the first 3 or 4 rounds of your draft. RB14. I wish I could put this guy higher, because I always rank this dude incredibly high. His circumstances have changed a little bit this year, but I can't deny my love for Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is my RB14, a guy that all he does is churn out RB1 seasons for the duration of his career. Yes, he no longer has Aaron Rodgers. That's probably going to play a significant role in what could potentially be a little bit more of a difficult, challenging year for him. Teams aren't going to honor the quarterback play in Green Bay as much as they have in years past. But Aaron Jones has earned his flowers as a veteran running back that has put up high-end RB1 seasons multiple times before. Maybe that's not necessarily in the realm of possibility now that he's a little bit older and it's in an offense going through a transition from Aaron Rodgers to the unproven Jordan Love. Maybe you feel little more pessimistic about a guy like Aaron Jones, but they're breaking in a new quarterback. The other side of that coin is they could just lean on the run a little bit more as Jordan Love gets his feet wet, gets his sea legs under him in the NFL. They have a pretty good tandem in the backfield along with A.J. Dillon. Aaron Jones, of course, is that 1A. He's proven to be an elite playmaker over the course of his career, averaging over 5 yards a carry for his career. Has an RB2 finish and an RB5 finish to his credit. Again, that was with Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback. But I've seen enough from Aaron Jones as a big-time playmaker. Despite the change in quarterback, I do think the Packers are going to lean on the run. Maybe more so than they had in seasons past. Where the efficiency might drop off a little bit, I think Aaron Jones could make up in volume. Remember, Aaron Jones has never been a guy who has had to rely on significant volume. The Packers have never given him a ridiculous 350 to 400 touch season. That's never happened in his career. So while Aaron Jones is a little bit older, he's not older in the traditional sense of running backs having accumulated significant mileage, significant tread on the tires. He's always been able to deliver on elite efficiency. You can argue that a lot of that had to do with Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback, but I mean, 213 carries last year. He caught 59 passes, almost 60, but again, he was still under 300 total touches. It's just never been something that Aaron Jones has done in his career. That might change this year. This might be the first year where Aaron Jones flirts with, 320 or so touches. It's never been something he's been asked to do, and yet he has still delivered big-time fantasy numbers on elite efficiency. Does the efficiency come down given this significant change in the offense? That's probably a fair assessment, but does the volume go up? I think that can happen too. Generally speaking, young quarterbacks getting their first opportunity as a full-time starter, you probably feel like it's more likely that they take the safe opportunities over the deep shots more often than not. That's the running. It's two things. It's the running back and the tight end, right? Short, safe throws. Aaron Jones is a proven upper echelon pass catcher at the running back position. He's a guy that can go over 60 catches, in my opinion. I don't think he's ever actually cracked that for any single season of his career. But he had 59 last year, so pretty close. A guy who is pretty clearly capable of catching an average of 3 or 4 passes a game. That is a significant difference maker from the running back position for fantasy, especially, obviously, if you play half or full PPR. His ADP is 54. It's not like he's coming off an injury-riddled season. His ADP is way down just because Aaron Rodgers is out of Green Bay. And yes, that's a significant factor, like I just said. But I feel like we're being too cautious with Aaron Jones. I feel like we're being way too cautious with this situation. Yeah, there's concern. Will the offense be in scoring position as much as it regularly was with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback? Sure, fair concern to have. But it's not like Aaron Rodgers had a spectacular season, had a very good season by his standards last year, and Jones still finished as an RB1 in points per game. The proof is in the pudding. Aaron Jones, I keep interchanging their names. Aaron Jones is a proven big-time playmaker in this league. I do think he can still finish as a low-end RB1 despite not having Rodgers as his quarterback anymore. It will be a little bit more tough. That's why I have him ranked as an RB2, a high-end RB2. But I do think the Packers lean on him a little bit more than they maybe would with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, just because they're breaking in a new guy who we've yet to be able to really get a chance to evaluate in Jordan Love. I think they lean on the run to that point. I also like A.J. Dillon at his depreciated cost. He's not cracking the RB2 rankings this year, but I do think the Packers will lean on their backfield to get them through games on offense this year. Aaron Jones, RB14 for the 2023 season. I have his arrow still trending up just because I think his cost is too low. You can get a proven RB1, 50-plus picks into the draft. Pretty, as far as running backs go, pretty squeaky clean injury history. He only misses a game or two each season for his career. Obviously, that could change on any given play. But I'm banking on the talent here despite the situational change. Aaron Jones, RB14 for the 2023 season. RB15, this is where it gets, you have some interesting fresh legs coming into the league versus some veterans who have proven it time and time again. But I am going to buy into the reports a little bit here, which have been glowing. And of course, the draft capital is significant. There's probably others that have him higher than I do, higher than RB15. I'm not sure I'm willing to go that much higher with this guy just yet. But I'm going to lean into the rookie hype here a little bit and rank Jahmyr Gibbs as the RB15 for 2023. In standard scoring leagues, he would be significantly lower than RB15. But I feel like it's fair to say the default scoring at this point for the vast majority of fantasy leagues is at least half PPR, if not full PPR scoring. This is where we expect Jahmyr Gibbs to thrive. Being billed as a potentially electric do-it-all playmaker out of the backfield for the Detroit Lions, who have a very interesting offense in general. They've got what's expected to be one of the best offensive lines in the league. And there are targets available in this offense after Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're not going to see Jameson Williams for the first 6 games of the year as he serves a suspension. Obviously, as of mid-season last year, TJ Hawkinson has moved on. They replaced him with Sam Laporta in the draft. That could take some time for that to actually, come to fruition as far as decent production from him as a rookie tight end. That's expecting a lot or asking a lot. But Gibbs, in 7 games as a freshman, 24 catches. In 12 games as a sophomore, that went up to 35. Moved up to 44 at Alabama 2022. The pass catching chops are there, so he's got 100 plus over a 3-year career. Again, fewer games played than in any NFL season. $44 catches in 12 games. That is almost 4 catches a game. So if he's able to make it through a, say 16, 17 game season, Gibbs should be, especially at the beginning of the season, should be a threat to, when it's all said and done, end up with that 65, 70 catches. It's sounding more and more each day like that is a fair expectation for the Lions rookie running back. They drafted him 12th overall in a day and age where the running back as a position has been devalued and deprioritized by the NFL. The Lions went against the grain on that one, taking him 12th overall, second RB off the board. It almost feels unprecedented to say something like that in 2023 when you look at the rest of the running back landscape in the NFL and see what those guys are up against as far as trying to get paid. Lions spent significant draft capital on Gibbs. We know what happened after that. They subsequently traded DeAndre Swift, freeing up multiple opportunities. Probably most of those are going to be, soaked up by Jahmyr Gibbs. Is he going to be Alvin Kamara right out the chute where he catches 80-plus passes? I'm not willing to go there. But when you consider what the Lions are working with in their receiving game, especially for the first 6 games, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then, a 34-year-old Marvin Jones, a guy like Josh Reynolds he'll make a play here and there, but not consistently. Sam Laporta is a rookie at tight end. They bring in David Montgomery, and I'll get to him in a bit. But Gibbs is going to be called upon early this season in his rookie campaign as a pass-catching playmaker out of the backfield. It wouldn't be totally surprising to see him line up here and there as a wide receiver, probably more as a slot guy than someone who lines up on the outside. But you got to imagine the Lions are going to want to get a little creative for the first 6 weeks of the season until they get Jameson Williams back. To me, that means get both of your running backs on the field. You put David Montgomery in the backfield. You put Jahmyr Gibbs, maybe starts in the backfield and, ends up lining up as a wide receiver for any given play. I feel like we're going to see this play out. We're going to see this happen, especially for the first 6 weeks of the season. The Lions have a great offensive line, one that we expect to be an easy top 5 unit in the NFL. So on top of what we expect from Gibbs from a yards creative perspective, the offensive line should be doing him and David Montgomery plenty of favors, helping to create opportunities for those two to do their thing. His ADP is high. For a guy who's, going to share the backfield with another proven good player in David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs' ADP is pretty high. But the hype train is heavy right now. The Lions are apparently expecting big things from him from day one. He's got an ADP of 39 on Underdog Fantasy. That is rich. I'll admit. That is a rich price to pay for a guy who has yet to take a snap in the NFL. But the early offseason reports out of Detroit are glowing. They clearly have big plans for Jahmyr Gibbs. Otherwise, why take him 12th overall in the NFL draft? I think it has to be half or full PPR formats for you to consider a guy like that as high as he's going. You can't possibly take him that high in a standard league. I do think most of that work, most of those carries, Gibbs will get his carries, make no mistake, but I do think David Montgomery is going to take the lion's share of those, or at least the majority of those. But as a playmaker, catching the ball out of the backfield, I think others will have Gibbs maybe even a few spots higher than I do. I think RB15 is a little fair. There are other guys that are a little bit more proven that I think I prefer, and guys that I can certainly wait a little bit later on to grab. That's the other thing, again, with Gibbs. You take him at 40, you're probably missing out on the likes of guys like Christian Watson and Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, DeAndre Hopkins, other really enticing wide receivers that we feel good about, especially in leagues that start 3 wide receivers, which I think is most leagues these days. Not all, but I think most. Nevertheless, it's pretty clear expectations are high for Jahmyr Gibbs. The ADP means that fantasy drafters feel the same way. 39 is pretty rich. And I guess as a result of me having him ranked as my RB15, I'm probably not going to end up with too many shares of him. But the market clearly believes to some degree in Jahmyr Gibbs and what's expected of him and what he is going to bring as a playmaker to this Lions offense. So I put him as my RB15 for 2023. Now, I have Gibbs sandwiched between two proven playmakers, two big time fantasy producers at the position. Aaron Jones was ahead of him. The guy I have behind him, my RB16, is Joe Mixon. I do have him one spot below Jahmyr Gibbs. And the reason for that is because been a bit of a tumultuous offseason for Joe Mixon, not just off the field, but there were whispers and rumors that the Bengals, in a way or as a means to save some money against the cap, they could just flat out release him. These were early offseason storylines or early offseason headlines. That hasn't happened, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen because the Bengals didn't really do much to address the position either in free agency or the draft. They added Chase Brown in the 5th round, but they also let Samaje Perine walk in free agency. So I don't think anything's going to happen as far as do the Bengals still potentially release Mixon to save money. If they were, they would have done it already because they can obviously by now designate it as a post June 1st cut to save themselves a few extra bucks. They haven't done that. That hasn't happened. The Bengals are clearly a win now team. They are going for it this year. At this point, it doesn't make much sense for them to try to move on from Joe Mixon given what their alternative options would be. So I think his roster spot is safe for one more season, and attached to that high octane offense, you feel good about a guy who has been a proven RB1 before. We just have to point out that by every advanced metric, Joe Mixon started to decline last year. He hasn't been a big yards per carry guy for his career, but last year he was under 4 yards per carry for the second time in his career. It was the third time in his career. The first time was he was a rookie. The second time, I think he only played 4 or 5 games before he suffered a season-ending injury, so he didn't really get a true opportunity to get going for the majority of his 2020 campaign. Um, Last year, 210 carries, 814 yards. That's a yards per carry of 3.9. That's not good. He did catch 60 passes, so that certainly buoyed him. And again, with Samaje Perine out of the picture, that could mean that Mixon finally gets a little bit more work on third down. But outside of the catches, he is coming off a big drop off from his 2021 season where he totaled over 300 touches and 1,200 rushing yards. He had a great touchdown number of 13. It was the only time he scored double-digit touchdowns in his career. It was a huge season for Joe Mixon in 2021. It was not the case in 2022. Crashed back to earth a little bit. But he's still attached to a high-octane offense. He will be 27 when the season starts, so we're not quite at the area where we could get concerned about his age just yet. It's getting there, but I don't think it's something we worry about this year. If he's able to get back to 60 catches, he'll be right there in the low-end RB1 conversation. And with an ADP, I think, of around 48, he's certainly affordable as a guy that you would maybe tag as a bounce-back candidate. These are the talking points in Mixon's favor. And they addressed the offensive line once again in free agency this year. They added, was it Orlando Brown? They added as their new left tackle. So that should certainly help. It'll just be interesting to see, you know, The Bengals utilized Samaje Perine a lot on third down last year. Do they feel like they can replicate that with some combination of not just Chase Brown, but Chris Evans and Trayvon Williams? That remains to be seen. If they continue to mix those guys in on third down, then Mixon, I mean, you still expect strong production from him, but then in that situation, it might make him a little frustrating to own. But he is proven. He is a guy that has put up RB1 seasons before, RB1 points per game type of player in a good offense attached to Joe Burrow. Scoring opportunities should remain high. If he's able to get back to double-digit touchdowns and maintain at least a 50-plus catch type of pace, he'll be there as a low-end RB1. Joe Mixon, RB16 on the season. At RB17, I have Travis Etienne. And I wasn't really sure what to do with him at this point. He had a decent season last year. The problem with Travis Etienne is I think we were expecting him to be more of a pass catcher. And that didn't really come to fruition. He did total, 1,400 scrimmage yards. He got the ball 220 times in the form of carries, and he caught 35 passes over the course of the season. Scored 5 touchdowns. Not bad. Not great. But not bad. But then the team added D'Ernest Johnson in free agency, and they drafted Tank Bigsby. On top of that, Calvin Ridley is coming back after a year and a half hiatus. They still have Christian Kirk. They still have Zay Jones. They still have Evan Ingram. You probably have to imagine this is a team that's going to throw the ball a little bit more than they did in 2022. And that would maybe not necessarily be a great development for ETN because, again, I think it was fair to say going into the season last year, we were expecting something in the 50 catch range, not 35. So he didn't catch the ball at a particularly enticing rate last year. 1,100 yards on the ground, 5.1 yards per carry. Those are good. Those are really good. 35 catches for a guy you're going to spend a top 45 pick on. It's not an awful sell, but it's not the most enticing sell. Doug Peterson has, a history dating back to his time in Philly, utilizing multiple backs, running a committee. So that probably means Tank Bigsby is going to get in there and get involved and steal touches away. They signed D'Ernest Johnson. He's going to get in there most likely. Again, you don't bring these guys in for nothing, right? And it's a new regime. It's not the same regime that drafted Travis Etienne. There's always that little wrinkle that you want to make sure you're mindful of. He's got an ADP of around 41. So a couple spots below Gibbs, multiple spots ahead of guys like Mixon, Walker, and Aaron Jones. all in all, when you factor the cost of those other running backs in that I like a little bit more, with the wide receivers in that range that I think I prefer, I don't have that many shares of Travis Etienne. I think he was the RB 16 or 17 in fantasy points per game in 2022. So I think I have him properly slotted. Like that RB 17 range, I think is fair. But he's being drafted, I believe, as like the RB 14. So while that doesn't sound like a significant difference, there are other guys being drafted 10 spots later than him that I like way more. He's being drafted as the RB 14. He finished as the RB 17, at least in fantasy points per game. So I just don't have that many shares of him. Excuse me. He finished as the RB 17 on the season, but in fantasy points per game, he was actually the RB 22. Forgive me. I was wrong, which makes this even worse. Travis Etienne he finished as the RB 17 overall, but on a points per game basis, he was a low end RB 2. He's being drafted as a high end RB 2. When you factor in what the Jaguars did this offseason and his ADP, I'm not going to have hardly any of Travis Etienne on any of my teams. But I do have him as the RB 17 for the purpose of these rankings. Now that I'm thinking about it, that might be a little too high. I guess what I'm essentially saying is, despite the mid RB2 ranking, I would fade Travis Etienne in 2023. My RB 18 is J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins is being drafted as the RB 18. He's got an ADP right now on Underdog Fantasy of around 57 overall. I still contest that that's a pretty good value. Now, there's a lot of question marks. Not bad question marks, just question marks in general about what the Baltimore offense is going to look like this year. Greg Roman is out, the guy that wanted to run some more. It was a dynamic running game, rushing attack in Baltimore for several years with obviously Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. But Greg Roman is out, and in is Todd Monken. Who we all expect to increase the level of pass plays called this year and not run as much as Roman liked to do when he was the offensive coordinator for Baltimore. So there's two sides to that coin. One, a few rushing opportunities might be taken away. But if that's replaced with targets and catches in an offense that I think people are sleeping on a little bit just because Lamar has had some injury issues the past couple of years. Nothing that we're worried about long term, but injuries that did ultimately force him to miss significant time. He also had his contract situation last year that he was navigating. So while I can't confirm that this is true or not, or how true it is, it's possible that Lamar was preserving himself a little bit to ensure that he got the most amount of money that he possibly could squeeze out of Baltimore. But people are remembering that, and I think there's a little bit of recency bias about wondering how good the Ravens offense could be. So there's, like I said, some question marks about what the Ravens offense might look like. But if it means more targets and catches for J.K. Dobbins, he's going to blow an ADP of 57 out of the water. That's a guy I'm interested in drafting, and probably a guy I should just go ahead and rank ahead of Travis Etienne. The reason Etienne has the RB17 ranking is, other than the 1,100 rushing yards, the good yards per carry, he's also attached to a good offense at least. But Dobbins is attached to what we expect to be a good offense as well. And his efficiency numbers for his career are good. He struggled to stay on the field last year. He suffered a significant injury in 2021 in training camp, forced him to miss a little bit of time to start the season. He tried to come back last year and he wasn't quite himself, had to go back and have more surgery that forced him to miss, I think, 5 or 6 games midseason. He didn't really return to form until the fantasy playoffs. And by that point, if you had J.K. Dobbins, there was a good chance that you didn't make it. So he didn't help too many people last year. I think that changes in 2023. He's now 2 years removed from that 2021 training camp injury. He remains locked in as the 1A running back in the Baltimore offense. Even if they run less, if they throw more, and Dobbins is able to corral a few more catches, the scoring opportunities should be there with Lamar back as the starter. They also revamped their wide receiver core. This offense as a whole should be better. They should score more if they're throwing more. And they will be throwing more with Todd Monken is there as their offensive coordinator. I think these changes are actually all a positive for J.K. Dobbins. So while we don't quite know what this offense is going to look like as far as the pecking order for targets, the run to pass ratio, we expect them to throw more and run less. But we actually got to see it come to fruition before we can actually determine anything here. I think everything is coming up flowers for J.K. Dobbins, and when you consider his ADP of 57, that's not breaking the bank for a guy who sneakily has low-end RB1 upside. J.K. Dobbins is my RB18, and I probably should have him a couple of spots higher in those rankings. I got a trade offer in one of my dynasty leagues. I promise I won't spend too much time on this, but it's always fun to see that. Yeah. All right. Not enticing. Moving on. My RB19. This guy is actually probably my most owned running back of the underdog best ball draft that I have done so far this season. I am a big believer this year in Cam Akers. He's being drafted as the RB21 with an ADP of 66 overall. On a Rams offense that is fully healthy coming into the 2023 season. I feel like people are writing the Rams off, not Cooper Kupp, but they're writing the Rams off as a whole just because they had an abysmal season last year, which I think is fair as far as attributing to a Super Bowl hangover. Now, usually the Super Bowl hangover happens to the loser of the Super Bowl. For this time, as it pertains to the Rams, it happened to the 2021-2022 Super Bowl winner. Cooper Kupp missed, I think, basically the last third of the season, if not longer, due to injury. Matthew Stafford was ultimately shut down pretty much halfway through the season. Cam Akers himself got off to a really rocky start in 2022. There was a time where he was away from the team for a few games. His future in general, not just on the Rams, but in the NFL, was starting to look like it was coming into question. But he ultimately returned to the team in the second half of the year and put up big numbers. Had a bad start, right? Week 1 was as bad as it gets. He got 3 carries and did quite literally nothing with it. He had 3 carries that turned it into 0 yards. He goose egged week 1. Started to find his footing a little bit. Week 2, he ended up totaling 65 or so yards of offense. Week 3, he had 60 yards of offense and a score. Week 4 was bad. Week 5 was not good. Week 6, another bottom out situation, or excuse me, that wasn't week 6. His 6th game back was not a good situation. 5 carries, 3 yards. That was in November. He basically took a month off. Could have been to get his mind right. He might have needed just time away from football to refocus, whatever have you. He missed a month after some really poor performances to start the season. It was looking dicey for Cam Akers. And he didn't really do much of anything for most of the season. It wasn't really until December that he finally started to turn it on. But in December, he turned it on. 12-4, 17 carries, 60 yards, 2 touchdowns. 12-8 against Vegas. Only 42 rushing yards, but he did score a touchdown. 12-19 against the Packers. 65 rushing yards on 12 carries. He caught 3 balls for 35 yards. So 100 yards from scrimmage. That's a good game. And then it started to come together for him for the last couple of weeks of the season. Went over 100 yards rushing his final 3 games. Caught at least 2 passes or had at least 3 targets in those last 3 games. 2 catches, 1 catch, 3 catches. So chipping in here and there in games where he's already totaling over 100 scrimmage yards, or excuse me, 100 rushing yards. And then the Rams did nothing to address the backfield in free agency or the draft. They brought back Sony Michel. Like, all right, whatever. They released Darrell Henderson at a time when it was like, what is going on with Cam Akers? In the midst of what was a bad season for Cam Akers, they still ended up releasing Darrell Henderson. In spite of all the turmoil, in spite of all the question marks that Cam Akers kind of brought upon himself in 2022, the Rams are putting all of their eggs back into one basket, and that's Cam Akers. They didn't really add anything in the draft. They only brought back Sony Michel in free agency. This is Cam Akers' backfield. In an offense where Matthew Stafford is back and Cooper Kupp is back. I expect the Rams to bounce back and have a much better 2023 season than they did 2022. Yes, Matthew Stafford is older at this point, and injuries have certainly taken their toll, but he's coming into this offseason healthy. Cooper Kupp is coming into this offseason healthy. This is an offense that it's a little top-heavy, but those are pretty good pieces to be able to rely on to score points. And, of course, you still have Sean McVay calling the shots as head coach. You believe in him as an offensive play caller. He's being drafted as the RB21 on Underdog Fantasy. I have him as my RB19 with a depreciated ADP of around 66. I think he's one of the best running back values available to you in 2023 redrafts. I'll die on this hill. Regardless of what happens, draft Cam Akers in 2023. I think he's got high RB2 upside. My RB20, I'm going out on a little bit of a limb here. but I think this is a good play to make. My RB20 is being drafted as the RB24. So it's not a significant reach, but I clearly am higher than the consensus. I have David Montgomery here, who has put up some pretty good strong seasons back to back. 160 half PPR fantasy points last year, 175 in 2021. He had a stretch at the end of 2020 where he absolutely carried uh his fantasy managers probably as far as the championship match. He went on a crazy good stretch to end the 2020 season. Followed it up with a good 2021, a pretty good 2022. Now he ends up in an even better situation. Again, the Detroit Lions, we're expecting to have a top 3 or top 5 offensive line, and there is work available in this offense because, like I mentioned with Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams is going to miss the first 6 weeks, and TJ Hawkinson moved on in a midseason trade last year. There are targets available here. And while we expect Jahmyr Gibbs to take most of those, David Montgomery is a proven pass catcher in his own right. Not to mention, his ADP is all the way down around 80. He's got single season catch totals of 34, 42, 54, and 25, respectively. 25 was, I think, his rookie season. So he's gone over 30 3 years in a row. He's gone over 40 2 times, and once he has a 50 catch season. Montgomery's a proven pass catcher out of the backfield. We expect Gibbs to get first crack at that opportunity as the pass catching specialist in this offense, but Montgomery can do it too. He hasn't been incredibly efficient from a per touch basis or from a per carry basis. He's only been over 4 yards a carry once in his career. He was right on the nose, 4 yards per carry last year, but he's only ever actually literally eclipsed 4 yards per carry one other time. But remember, these were some bad Bears offenses that Montgomery played on. Now in Detroit, with that offensive line and the expectations that we have with the Lions for a team as a whole, this is probably the best situation that he's ever been in. He's a guy who has regularly had an ADP in the 4th or 5th round when he was with the Bears. And now he's a guy that you can get in the 7th round with the Lions. Yes, Jahmyr Gibbs is there. He hasn't had to contend with a Jahmyr Gibbs type of player when he was in Chicago. Yeah, they had Khalil Herbert for a couple of seasons while he was there. We expect more of Jahmyr Gibbs. So the depreciated cost is understandable. But Montgomery has delivered rock solid, safe RB2 numbers for most of his career, and he's had a stretch of being a top 5 running back. It was a small stretch, but it happened at one of the most crucial times, the fantasy playoffs. He probably carried people in 2020 at least to the fantasy semis and probably got a good number of people to their fantasy championship game. Now I can have him 80 picks into a draft. Feels like spectacular value on a good offense. Remember, we expect the Lions as a team to be pretty good. When's the last time you said that sentence? Because their defense looks like it's going to be solid. They should be, by nature of the beast, if they're playing with leads, they should be running the football in the second half of games. That's going to be when David Montgomery comes into play. He might be kind of boring compared to Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs is the flashy, exciting upside pick, 39 ADP overall. Montgomery is kind of boring. But at 80 overall, when you look at the production he put up on some bad Bears offenses, I am buying David Montgomery. I am higher than him on consensus. He's being drafted as the RB24. I have him listed as the RB20. I think he's in for a really good season. My RB21 is Alexander Madison. And I feel like just based on the what he has done and the opportunities he has received when he was given the lion's share of touches for any single game, I can understand if some people want to have him higher, right? He's now projected as the RB1 in Minnesota. Dalvin Cook has been released. Dalvin Cook has regularly been an RB1 in Minnesota. And when Dalvin Cook was forced to miss games, Alexander Madison put up RB1 performances in damn near every single chance he got in those situations. So there's going to be a lot of people who have Alexander Madison higher than I do. And I mean, we've already seen that development start to happen. His ADP is inside of 60. It's around 59 and a half. So you got to draft Alexander Madison in the 5th round if you want him. And that's a fine spot. I don't think that's a bad spot for Alexander Madison. What the question is can he maintain consistent RB1 performance after RB1 performance on a week-to-week basis as the guy? He's not going to be entering those situations anymore as a fresh legs backup. He's going to be the dude who's expected to do it week over week, each week now. Can he sustain that? That's the $1 million question. He will have RB1 weeks. He should have a slew of them. But where I'm, curious to see is can he hold that up over the course of ideally a 16 or 17 game season? His ADP is only 2 spots below J.K. Dobbins, but he's being drafted over Cam Akers and David Montgomery, who, sure, they have their warts, but I just got done talking about how much I like those guys, the reasons I like those guys. And because I can get them 7, 8, 9, 10, and actually in Montgomery's case, it's 20 picks after Alexander Madison, kind of like Travis Etienne, I don't find myself in too many scenarios where I'm drafting Alexander Madison. If he falls 10 spots below ADP, sure, I'll take him 70 picks in. 58, 59, 60 picks in, slightly tougher sell for me. It should still be a good offense in Minnesota. Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison. That should be a good offense with plenty of scoring opportunities. And Alexander Madison should have his RB1 weeks. Will he have enough to warrant being drafted as a high-end RB2? And how much will the likes of Ty Chandler and Dwayne McBride factor in? Maybe they are just deep change of pace guys the way Alexander Madison was when Dalvin Cook was the starter. But I don't think it's fair to just take one situation and compare it to the new situation just because it feels somewhat similar. Because Dalvin Cook, over the course of his career, had been one of the best running backs in the NFL. I don't know if Alexander Madison is going to get a label like that after 2023. So I still rank him as an RB2. We're now officially in the lower end of the RB2 rankings. He's being drafted a little higher than where I have him relative to the other guys that I am drafting. So I don't end up with Alexander Madison a ton. Generally speaking, I need him to fall a little bit in drafts for me to take him in 2023. But we'll see. The opportunity is wide open for him now. And I do think it's fair to say he's definitely the most talented back on that roster. This is probably where we're really going to start fluctuating as far as who has, who has who, as far as which running backs crack your top 24. I think this is a fair consensus here for the most part, but these guys have their warts. And so while I have them ranked as RB2s, it doesn't mean that I'm all in on them. I might have a little bit of pause for them here and there, but from an expectation perspective, we can still rank these guys as RB2s. My RB22 for the 2023 season, it's a little out of respect for what he did last year, but as a result of the new situation, I can't put him any higher. I have Miles Sanders here. Sanders is coming off his best season as a pro in Philly in 2022. I think he had 1,300 rushing yards last year. 1,270. All right, I was off by a little bit. But he did just crack 1,300 total scrimmage yards because he caught 20 passes for a whopping 80 yards last year. That's the issue with Miles Sanders. He had a great rookie season catching the football. He caught 50 passes as a rookie. It looked like he was going to be this great dual threat running back going into his sophomore campaign. Since then, he hasn't had more than 28 catches in 3 subsequent years. And last year was a bottom out with 20. Running behind the best offensive line in football last year, he had far and away his best season. 259 carries, 1,269 yards, averaged almost 5 yards a carry, 11 touchdowns. All of these numbers that I'm listing right now are by far career highs. 259 carries. That was a career high by 80 last year. 1,269 rushing yards. He hadn't even cracked 1,000 in 3 seasons prior. 11 touchdowns in 2022. His previous high watermark was 6. Miles Sanders had a career year last year in a great offense, running behind the best offensive line in football. Now he goes to Carolina, who did run the football well last year, even after they traded Christian McCaffrey. Donta Foreman had a good season for the Carolina Panthers when he was inserted as the starter. This is an offense that can run the ball well. And remember, they didn't have good quarterback play last year. You expect it to be at least marginally better with Bryce Young, who is a rookie, but first overall pick comes with expectations. You expect the quarterback play in Carolina this year to be marginally better than what it was last year, which shouldn't be hard. But let's call a spade a spade. Even though the Panthers ran the ball well last year, this is a downgrade in overall situation for Miles Sanders, going from the Eagles offense in 2022 to the Carolina Panthers offense in 2023, which you expect to take some growing pains with Bryce Young under center as he gets his sea legs under him in the NFL. Sure, you can have high expectations as a first overall pick, but a rookie is still a rookie. There's going to be growing pains. I actually grappled with leaving Miles Sanders out of my top 24 rankings this year. But out of respect for what he did last year, I have him here as my RB22. He's got an ADP of about 64 on Underdog Fantasy, so that's not super expensive, but I'm not really buying him. Like, I'll take Cam Akers 2.5 picks later. I'll take David Montgomery 15 picks later. I'll take Rachaad White 16, 17, 18 picks later. He didn't crack my top 24, but I'll take him just opportunity cost 17, 18 picks later. I'll take James Conner 20 picks later. Hell, with the news about Alvin Kamara, I'll take Alvin Kamara 30 picks later. Which, by the way, I did. If you didn't see, I did drop a video about Alvin Kamara's legal situation on the channel if you want to check that out. Basically, going over, do you actually want to draft Alvin Kamara in 2023? Because we are still expecting a suspension. but maybe now the penalty won't be as severe. So feel free to check that out if you've got any interest in Alvin Kamara for the 2023 season, or if maybe you're just curious in general. But opportunity cost, there's just more running backs later in the draft that I'd rather have than Miles Sanders. He had a great year last year. Kudos to him, credit to him. But the situation is vastly different going from the Eagles offense to the Panthers offense. I have my doubts. I do have him listed here as my RB22 out of respect for what he did last year. But given some of the names at running back that I can get after Miles Sanders is getting drafted, I'm not really taking him very often in 2023. Nevertheless, I do have him listed as my RB22, but he is an RB22 with a lot of red flags. And that's not, and necessarily, I don't mean it as a personal indictment on Miles Sanders, but he just hasn't had that many, the 3 seasons prior to last year were good. They weren't great. So all in all, unless he falls by a good bit, I am avoiding Miles Sanders in 2023, despite cracking the top 24 rankings. Bringing it home with my last 2 running backs that have cracked my top 24. At running back 23, I have Dameon Pierce. 220 carries last year, 939 rushing yards, only 4 touchdowns. Obviously, Houston was not a very good team in general last year, so there were not a whole lot of scoring opportunities last year for Pierce. That should theoretically improve now that CJ Stroud is the starting quarterback. Still a rookie. He's going to take his lumps. He's going to take his growing pains, but I have to imagine even rookie CJ Stroud is better, is going to give you better quarterback play than what Davis Mills was able to give last year. Caught 30 passes. That doesn't blow you away. It doesn't jump off the page. But a couple catches per game. If he's able to increase that a little bit, which is certainly possible because remember, the Texans traded Brandon Cooks, and maybe there isn't a direct correlation between wide receiver and running back targets, but there are now targets available in this offense. Pierce could pick a couple of those up. They did add Dalton Schultz in free agency, the Texans did. So maybe that kind of counterbalances it a little bit. But in year 2, the Texans offense should be a little bit better. I don't know that it's necessarily better than I don't know that they're in the top half of the league. They're much more likely to be in the bottom half of the league. But even if they are marginally better as far as being in scoring position a few more times, if Pierce is able to up his touchdowns by even a couple on what should be a slightly better offense, I think there's some decent upside with Pierce, who has an ADP of around 70 in one quarterback leagues. As an RB1, a team's RB1, 70 picks in where the situation is ascending or you expect it to be ascending. That's why I feel a little bit better about a guy like Dameon Pierce as opposed to a guy like Miles Sanders. Yes, both offenses should be ascending. But the difference for Miles Sanders is he's going from a great situation to a lesser situation. Pierce, as far as I'm concerned, might have done more with less than Miles Sanders did in 2022 relative to team expectations and offensive output, if that makes sense. The team did add Devin Singletary to the backfield. I have always liked Devin Singletary as like a decent, not spectacular, but a decent depth running back for your fantasy team. Even though it was on a Bills offense where Josh Allen was the guy getting most of the rushing production. And he'll mix in, there's no doubt. Devin Singletary will get his opportunities. But I think they're going to rock with Dameon Pierce as their starter. He's the guy that they've invested in. Just a 4th-round pick, but they made him the starter pretty much right away last year. I think that stays the same. I don't think this is necessarily going to be some 50-50 backfield split. Um, Pierce should continue to be the guy in the backfield for the Houston Texans. If he's able to add, a catch or two per game to his totals, and if he's able to, sniff the end zone a few more times, because we expect the Texans to be in scoring opportunities a few more times, a little bit more often in 2023 than they were in 2022. I think Pierce is perfectly fine as far as expectations as a low end RB2 from a draft perspective. Pierce was the RB22 in fantasy points per game last year, again on a bad offense. So I do think his arrow is trending slightly up, and why I feel comfortable making him my RB23 with some cautious upside for this season. To bring it home, and appreciate you guys coming in and hanging out with me today. Happy to answer any questions if any arise, if any come up. But otherwise, we're going to finish these rankings off here. My final running back who cracked the top 24 rankings, again, reaching down a little bit, but not a significant amount. The consensus has him as a high-end RB3. I think he's more of a, got a chance to be a low-end RB2 with some mid-level RB2 upside if the offense is better than we maybe expect it to be going into the season. This is where I have James Conner to round out my RB2s. He's being drafted as the RB27 on Underdog Fantasy, ADP of about 85 overall. But this is his backfield. They don't really have anybody else, does Arizona. I believe the last time I checked, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the straight up backup to James Conner is Keontae Ingram. There is not a whole lot here as far as depth behind James Conner. Ingram last year rushed 27 times for 60 yards. It's an average of 2.2. That's not very good. Yeah, this might not be a very good team in Arizona. It's a team that a lot of people expect to be drafting close to the top of the 2024 draft. We expect the team to take a cautious approach with quarterback Kyler Murray. He suffered a torn ACL in December last year. He's only going to be about 8 or 9 months removed from that from surgery on that injury when the season begins. So he's probably not going to be out there for week 1, even though he said recently that his goal is to be available for week 1. Of course it is. But he's only going to be about 8 months removed from the surgery. Generally speaking, it's like a 10-month timeline as far as ACL recoveries and return to field. Not return to form, but at least the return to the field. So we may need to wait a little bit on Kyler, but I think right now everybody's expectation is that Kyler is not going to play until like week 9 or 10 at the earliest, based on the fact that his ADP is around like 165. And when you couple that with the expectations that the Cardinals have coming into the season, which is they're going to be bad, people are correlating that to, well, Kyler's just probably not going to play at all in 2023. And that could happen. But by the end of September into October, Kyler will then be about 10 months removed from the ACL surgery, which would suggest, based on general timelines as far as return to play from an ACL, that he'll be ready way sooner than I think people are giving him credit for. And if Kyler plays, this offense is going to be fine. It might not be one of the best in the league, but it'll be good enough. It'll be good enough. And that should mean there are going to be more scoring opportunities for the Cardinals than I think people are giving them credit for right now in July as we sit here a couple of weeks before training camp. As a result of all of this, the Cardinals skill position players, their value is really depreciated. And Connor himself missed time last year, right? Only 183 carries, 780 yards, scored 7 touchdowns. Um, Numbers that don't necessarily jump off at you jump off the page at you, but he did have 46 catches last year, and DeAndre Hopkins is gone. Not just the concern about the Cardinals offense in general, but the concern about Connor's potential availability on a week to week basis in general, I think is already being baked into his ADP. You can get a team's clear cut RB1 on an offense that I think should be a little bit better than the general public is giving them credit for, 85 picks into a draft. He's going to get all the goal line work, he's going to get all the short yardage work, and he's a proven pass catcher. He's being drafted as the RB27. I have him as my RB24. On a per game basis last year, on a fantasy points per game basis last year, James Conner was the RB10. He was an RB1 in fantasy points per game. Now, yeah, Kyler was playing most of those games. But if we think that Kyler's going to play sooner than expected, which I think we need to start preparing for that, we're talking about a guy who finished as a low end RB1 in fantasy points per game being available in the 8th round of your drafts. You got to take advantage of that. You got to buy the dip on James Conner. Some of the guys who are being drafted ahead of him, who I'd rather have, or who I would rather have Conner than that guy. DeAndre Swift has an ADP of 78. Rachaad White has an ADP of 83. Isaiah Pacheco has an ADP of 84, so only one spot above. I would rather have James Conner than all three of those guys. 4 picks later is Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook doesn't have a team right now. 5 picks after that is Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams is the one who's dealing with the significant injury that resulted last year. Torn ACL, torn LCL, torn MCL. Basically, the 3 or 4 guys right ahead of Connor and the 2 or 3 guys right below him, I'd rather have Connor over all those guys by a decent margin. Yeah, it might not be a great offense. Pacheco's going to be in a really good offense. Swift is going to be in a really good offense. And Rachaad White, we expect to be a PPR monster. But Connor's the proven commodity here who put up on a per game basis last year RB1 numbers. He comes in as my RB24. He's got upside that supersedes that. I think it's going to be, as long as he stays healthy. Obviously, that's a big caveat, but that's a big caveat with it, literally any NFL player. If James Conner's able to stay healthy for 12, 13, 14 games, you can expect top 15 production from him, and you're getting him as the RB27. Draft James Conner. He's my RB24 overall, but he's got upside that surpasses that by, I think, a decent amount. Circle him, star him, do whatever you got to do. I would leave my draft with James Conner if I were you. And that's all I have to say about that. Those are my RB2 rankings for the 2023 season. One more time just to fire them off real quick. Kenneth Walker, RB13. Aaron Jones, RB14. Jahmyr Gibbs, RB15. Joe Mixon, RB16. Travis Etienne, RB17. Not really buying him. J.K. Dobbins, RB18. I am buying. Cam Akers, RB19. I'm buying a lot. David Montgomery, RB20. I'm buying. Alexander Madison is RB21. Not really buying. Miles Sanders, RB22. Not buying. Dameon Pierce, RB23. I'm not going out of my way to buy him, but I will. And James Conner, RB24. I'm buying a lot. That's my list. Happy to hear any feedback if you guys have any. We can obviously keep this conversation going over in the Discord if you so choose. The chat is kind of quiet today. That's okay. So probably going to go ahead and shut this down here shortly. But happy to take any feedback whatsoever as far as what you think about the RB2 rankings that I have for the 2023 season. Otherwise, I think that's going to do it for me tonight. Again, appreciate you guys coming in and hanging out as always. Kamara video was out on the channel if you guys want to check that out. We'll cover the wide receivers next week, wide receiver rankings for the 2023 season. And also for the members, I'm starting to put together the 2023 draft plan. You guys will be getting that early. I'll be sure to message you guys about that separately so you guys can be on the lookout for that. And it'll go out to the general public later this summer. Looking forward to putting that together for you guys. But that'll do it for me tonight. Thank you guys again one more time for coming in and hanging out. Have a great weekend. Have fun. Stay safe. We'll talk wide receiver rankings next week. Thanks, everybody.